Okay, good evening, everyone. It's just to make sure. Pinchas, can you say something, Pinchas, just to make sure?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be able to welcome Pinchas Melchior with us. I heard him speak over one of the Zoom sessions when he described his story, and it was so moving because it brought back to me such special memories as a youngster when me and my brothers were taken on a Shabbat afternoon on walks with the late Jan Fuchs. And the late Mr. Fuchs, Jan Fuchs, he took us on walks through the Mary Louise Gardens in Didsbury and shared with us his whole story of his life, and specifically his time in the Second World War, how he went through Czechoslovakia and from there went to Denmark and stayed during the war in Denmark and was saved with all the other Jews in Denmark and went to Sweden. And who knows, for all you know, Pinchas and Mr. Fuchs met each other at some point. We don't know, but just to still remember so vividly that story and how he was saved, and then be able to hear it again from Pinchas is something which is so fitting, especially in this week, which is the Holocaust Remembrance Week, and specifically Holocaust Remembrance Day in a couple of days' time. So to be able to hear not only about the history of the Jews of Denmark, but how they were saved through the eyes of Pinchas and his family, it's something very, very fitting. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass on to Pinchas and just highlight his screen. Spotlight for everyone. Okay. Thank you, Pinchas.
First of all, thank you. I consider it a big honor to have been invited by you to talk in the framework of your congregation. Also, it's my second visit to Manchester. The first one was about 40 years ago when I was an Aliyah Shaliach in London, and I came to Manchester one night to speak at a BAM meeting. I don't know if you know what BAM is today. It used to be the British Aliyah movement, which had branches in many cities all over the UK. And I was invited to speak to one of the meetings in Manchester. But I'm very happy to be with you tonight and to share with you my story of the Holocaust. I have two introductory remarks. One is that my Holocaust story, I don't know why, but I had the happy fate to be saved most of the persecutions, cruelties, etc., which are normal in a Holocaust story. All those people who come from other countries than Denmark. So it's without being shall we say, a very easy life during those years. It was absolutely different from what many millions of other Jews unfortunately had to go through. The other remark is that I was a very young boy at the time that the major events that I'm going to describe took place. I was 5 years at the time that we were brought in safety to Sweden. So I must say there are certain images and pictures which are still in my memory. But of course, most of what I'm going to tell you is what I have learned and heard during my life. So I'll start a little bit in introduction about Danish Jews in general. And I would like to share with you. Oh, that was not the intention. Hey, what is that? Da, 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 da. There we go. That's better. Judæ, Denmark, Vatsalatan, Danish Jews and their rescue. That's what we are going to deal with. And we'll start just to remind you of where Denmark is in the world. You know probably quite well, most people don't, that the Denmark is just a kind of protrusion on the European continent. Here we have the peninsula of Jutland or Jylland, and here is the capital Copenhagen. We'll see it a little more closely here in this map here. Again, altogether, Denmark has an area of about 43,000 square kilometers. About half is the peninsula of Jutland, which has the only land border that Denmark has, the border with Germany, which is about 70 kilometers long. The rest of Denmark is somewhere around 500 islands, of which 100 are populated. And we have the capital Copenhagen here. It's a strange position for a capital, but that has to do with the fact that during the Middle Ages, the southern provinces of what today is Sweden belonged to Denmark, enabling the Danish king a big revenue of taxes put on ships going from the Baltic Sea through the strait here, the Øresund, on their way to the Atlantic Ocean. That was a very important source of income. In this over here, between the Danish town of Helsingør, the town of Hamlet, and the Swedish Helsingborg, there are only about 4 kilometers of water. Between Copenhagen and Malmö, it's about 18 kilometers, but they are now connected with a bridge. We could have used that in those days, but anyway, that is the general picture of Denmark. When we talk about Jews of Denmark today, and also at the time of the events of the Second World War, we are almost talking only about Copenhagen. So now in the Middle Ages, there were no Jews in Denmark. The first Jews came to Denmark by the grace of this nice gentleman here. He is the King Christian IV, who reigned in the 17th century. He was very adventurous and took the Danish army on all kinds of adventures, which cost a lot of money and usually were not very successful. So he also needed a lot of money, of course. And then he had a brilliant idea. He wanted to establish a city which should compete with the city of Hamburg for the hegemony of trade in Northern Europe. He established it not far from Hamburg on the same river Elbe, where Hamburg is at the end. He named the city Glückstadt, meaning the city of luck or fortune. And he had heard that Jewish, particularly the so-called Portuguese Jews, were very successful tradesmen. So he invited those Jews from Hamburg, Amsterdam, and so on to come and settle in the new town and bring it prosperity. He was willing to give them privileges which in those days, we are talking about 1620, in those days were very far-reaching, having synagogue, allowing them to teach Judaism and Hebrew, etc., all that, so they could help him develop this city. the city, just bring here a short Hebrew quote from Rabbi Yosef Shlomo del Medigo, Hayashar Mikandia. He was born in Crete. He was a rabbi, a scientist, a doctor, astronomer of stature, and he spent a short time in Glückstadt, and he wrote, Uvati bo ir chadasha Glückstadt, I came to the new city of Glückstadt, ukeshma lo keni, and she is absolutely not living up to her name. Lo irhi, not a city, velo brachaba, and there's no blessing and no luck and no fortune in that city. So he continued on his way to Amsterdam. Christian IV was a very interesting king. With all his failures, he is one of the most beloved ones in the series of Danish kings. And he had a special passion. We don't know why and where from. He has a special passion for the Hebrew name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As you see here on one of his buildings, the round tower in the center of Copenhagen, we have the name of Yud K Vav K on the wall of this building. It was originally an observatory, and he wrote rebus here, which means the knowledge of justice. The sword represents justice. May the should be directed by Hashem into the heart of King Christian IV. That's what it says here. But we have Yud K Vav K in Hebrew letters also over the entrance to a church he built for the seamen in Copenhagen. We also have the Yud K Vav K. In general, he built some very beautiful buildings which are still worth seeing in Copenhagen. Now, as I said, the project of Glückstadt was not too successful, but the importance, as far as we are concerned, is that it gave the Jews the first foothold in Denmark. And eventually, both Portuguese and also Ashkenazi Jews started settling in Denmark in quite a large number of cities all over Denmark. The first organized community was that in Copenhagen. And as you can see, in 1984, the Danish Postal Service issued this stamp in honor of 300 years of the Jewish community in Copenhagen. It was drawn by a Jewish artist, Marianne Nagler, a good friend of ours, for the Danish Postal Service. So that was the beginning of Jews in Denmark. To divert a little bit to my private family, this was the first Melchior who settled in Denmark. That was in 1760 that he got permission to settle in Copenhagen. This is the permission he got after he had donated a serious amount of money to the Copenhagen police force. During the 17th, 18th, 19th century, there was a process of integration into the Danish society, particularly in the 19th century, after the Jews first had received civil rights in 1814, and then full rights with the Danish constitution in 1849. Many Jews prospered, and many Jews really were accepted into the Danish high society. We have here a family, Mr. Nathanson and his wife, coming home from an audience in the royal palace, being received at home by 8 of their 9 children. This is a painting by one of the most famous Danish painters of the 19th century. Now, this Nathanson was a very interesting person because besides his success in business life and in general life, he was founder of one of the big Danish newspapers that continue to be published till this day. Besides that, he took an interest in Jewish matters as well, and he was actually the founder of the Jewish day school in Copenhagen in 1805. Must be one of the oldest Jewish day schools in Europe. He founded the school, first a school for boys, and then a few years later a school for girls. And then you will probably be surprised to hear that all of his 9 children eventually were baptized. So it sounds like an oxymoron here with his founding of the Jewish Day School and then his children being baptized. It was the reason was that nowadays when we speak about the Jewish Day School, it's usually a school that intends to strengthen the Jewish identity of the children. In this case, it was different. The intention of this day school founded by Nathanson was to increase the Danish identity of the Jewish children. It was in order to help these backwards children, so to speak, to enable them to enter the Danish society successfully. And so there was no contradiction actually between these two facts. That was a well-known development among German Jews of the 19th century, Heinrich Heine and so on and so forth. And people wanted, became baptized as what they called a ticket to European culture and the European society. That was very much the reason behind this development of this extreme assimilation that took place in Germany and also in Denmark. So actually, when we approach the end of the 19th century, the Jewish community in Denmark was actually about to disappear. There had been, as I mentioned, there had been communities in many cities all over Denmark, but the Jews who remained there, those who wanted to keep their Judaism alive, would move to Copenhagen, and the rest would assimilate. So what is left of those Jewish communities today is Batei Olam, cemeteries in 10 Danish provincial towns. But also in Copenhagen, the numbers dwindled. But then came the beginning of the 20th century, and with it, the huge immigration from Eastern Europe in direction of the United States. And as it happens on the way, some of this big stream of people, some of them dropped off on their way, some in England, but a few also in Denmark. Sometimes it would be because the captain of the ship they were on would tell them, we are now in the United States, everybody get off. And the people found themselves in Denmark. Some continued anyway, but some did not, maybe also because they didn't have the means of further traveling. In that way, the number of Jews in Copenhagen were almost doubled, from about 3,000 up to 6,000. The community never got beyond 7,500 people in all. It is not that these new immigrants to Denmark were received with open arms by the Viking Jews who were there before them, but and it took really many years before they really became integrated in the Jewish community. Only in the 30s, the first of them got a seat in the management of the Jewish community. Nevertheless, we can say that today, I think that 90% of the Jewish community in Copenhagen are descendants of those Jews who came from Eastern Europe in the beginning of the 20th century. In the community, there was a lot of internal strife and discussion. Some groups tended to create a reform community in Copenhagen. Against them, there were those who held very strictly on to halakha and so on and so forth. So there were a number of synagogues, but most of them, unfortunately, burned down in a huge fire that happened in Copenhagen in 1795. But about 1830, the Jewish community in Copenhagen were lucky to find a rabbi. His name was Abraham Alexander Wolf. He was a young rabbi at the time, and he came to Copenhagen, and he managed, number one, to complete a project which had been waiting for many years of building a big synagogue in Copenhagen, which is what you see before you right now. And furthermore, he was successful in uniting almost all the Copenhagen Jews into one community. He made a number of concessions which today seem trivial to us, but for example, giving the weekly sermon in the shul in Danish was a huge revolution in those days, and he took that upon himself. He also translated some Mizmorei Tehillim, some chapters of the book of Psalms, into Danish poetry, and had the music put onto them so that such a Danish psalm could be sung before and after the weekly sermon. And in that way, he somehow managed to placate the reformists in the community, and they stayed on within a united community. And that's the way it stayed for many years. There were one or two dissenters who had their own small synagogue parallel, but basically this is the Copenhagen Shul, inaugurated in 1833. And until very recently, except for the time we were not in Copenhagen, there have been minyanim every day, morning and evening in this synagogue. Just to give you a look also at the Aron Kodesh when it's opened, it's really an amazing sight. When first you ascend a whole floor up to the Aron Kodesh, and then the Aron itself is 4 meters high. So when it's opened, it's really what we call a wow sight. Okay, now we'll jump 100 years forward from 1833 to 1933. As those who are good at arithmetic will have found out, in 1933, it was 100 years since the inauguration of the Copenhagen Synagogue. And the community decided to mark this by having a big festive ceremony in the month of April 1933. And they all even went as far as inviting the king we have jumped from Christian IV to Christian X, inviting the king to attend this festive ceremony, and the king had promised to be present. But as I'm sure you are aware, in January, 30th of January that year, Hitler came to power in Germany. And he more or less immediately started his activities against the Jews. Already on the 1st of April, they declared a boycott of all Jewish businesses in Germany. Shops were looted and smashed and so on and so forth on that day. And Denmark is a small country, and Germany is a very large neighbor. So in real diaspora spirit, some of the management of the community approached the king and told him that if under the new circumstances in Germany, it would not be convenient for the king to attend a ceremony in the Jewish synagogue, the community would have understanding for such a change of mind. And what did the king answer? He said, "Are you crazy? Now I really want to come." And so it was. King Christian took part in the ceremony, and it was a big success. In the 30s, there was an ongoing discussion in Denmark about the ideology that had developed south of the Danish border. But very few actually adopted that ideology, the Nazi ideology. Most Danes who took part in that public debate did absolutely distance themselves from what was going on in Germany. But Germany is still a very big country, and it was also an important market for Danish products, especially agricultural products, dairy products and meat. And so somehow the Danes tried not publicly, at least, not to criticize too harshly what was going on in Germany. Furthermore, also the Danish policy towards people who tried to find refuge in Denmark from Germany were not received any better in Denmark than in other countries, meaning that they were usually not received at all. Furthermore, when we get to 1939, in the spring of 1939, Denmark and Germany signed a non-aggression pact between them, meaning that the two countries promised not to attack the other country, at least for the first 10 years. I don't know whether the Germans slept better after having signed this tractate with Denmark, but the Danes, they simply continued to sleep and did not take any precautions for the case that the Germans should get the crazy idea to attack Denmark. This tractate was actually some kind of a gesture towards Great Britain, who after the München Tractate in 1938, when the Germans received sovereignty over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, the British had demanded of the Germans that they should refrain from attempting to invade other neighboring smaller neighboring countries. And the Danes went along with the idea and signed that tractate. So the crucial day came on the 9th of April, 1940. On that day and that morning, the inhabitants of Copenhagen woke up to the noise of German airplanes flying over the city and distributing these flyers, throwing them out from the airplanes. At the same time, German army entered Denmark via the land border in southern Jutland, and a German navy vessel anchored up with soldiers in the harbor of Copenhagen. And there were a few battles fought in southern Jutland, but we could say that the military operations between the two countries were over within about 2.5 hours from they started. What happened was that the Germans had actually prepared an arrangement by which Denmark would continue to enjoy sovereignty, and Denmark would continue to be able to manage their internal affairs as they were used to. The Danish institutions, whether parliament, government, judicial system, the king, they would all remain in their positions. The Germans would just somehow overlook what was going on, that nothing would be done that could anger the Germans. So a plenipotentiary was placed in Copenhagen. German soldiers were also present all over Denmark, but just to make sure that everything went according to the agreement. The Germans were interested in this for a couple of reasons. One reason being, and maybe the main reason being, what I mentioned before, that Denmark was a supplier of much of the food import to Germany. It's estimated that more than 10% of the food consumed by Germans had its source in Denmark. And of course, in a war situation that existed at that time, many other sources of supplies to Germany had become unavailable. So that was very important. Second, it seems also that the Germans were interested in showing the world that you could live happily and well under some kind of German supremacy and live a good and happy life along with that. They said that they were not at all coming to make war on Denmark. The excuse they gave for invading Denmark, and on the same day also Norway, the excuse was that they claimed that the British planned an invasion to the two countries on the west coast of Denmark and Norway that are facing the UK. So that was the formal excuse for invading the two countries. By the way, for people who know Danish, if it wasn't that serious, this flyer would be really funny because it is written in a very bad Danish language. But that was the beginning. And the Danish government decided, together with the king on that day, to accept the German supremacy in Denmark. But there were, as I said, first of all the institutions would continue to operate as before. And actually also one of the conditions was that no legislation or other means would be applied against the Jews. That meant that basically the Jewish community and the Jewish organizations could also continue their activity more or less as before. That was the situation in Denmark basically until the summer of 1943. That doesn't mean that the Danes were very happy with the Germans, absolutely not. The king became a national symbol of really statute. He continued what he had done also before. Every morning, including the day after the occupation of Denmark, every morning he would saddle his horse and ride through the city of Copenhagen to say good morning to his citizens in Copenhagen. And as you can see, he was very popular, and amid all the bicycles, etc., he would make his morning ride through the city. And really, as one poet expressed it, he was showing that Denmark was still in the saddle. Another expression of that love of the Danish king was later in the year. He celebrated his 70th birthday. On that occasion, this pin was designed and produced by Georg Jensen. And during the years of the war, it was produced in more than 1 million of those pins were produced, and lots and lots of Danes would wear it on their clothes to show their national identity and their identification with the king. And he was really a very special figure. But we'll come back to him in a moment. The Danes were, of course, they hated the occupation. They couldn't do much, and the government insisted very, very severely on the Danes keeping the roots, keeping quiet, not provocating in any way the Germans, who would then be likely to take measures that were very unpleasant to Denmark. So the Danes tried to find ways of expressing their national feelings. One of them was the so-called alsang, meaning that on Sunday afternoons, thousands of people would get together in parks and public gardens to sing patriotic songs. Here we have such a gathering, and you can see that it was really something which caught on. Here is also, that's a Sunday afternoon in a park in Copenhagen, where people got together simply to sing Danish national patriotic songs as a way of expressing their dismay with the situation. They would also make funny plays about the Germans, satirical plays. When it couldn't be performed in the evening because of curfews, they would be performed at 6 o'clock in the morning. So people would get up early and they would go to the theater and have a good laugh at the Germans before they went to work. So that was some of the ways in which Danes tried to keep their national feeling of identity, Danish identity. And we get back to the king. I'm sure that many of you have heard the story. We call it that's the story of King Christian X wearing the yellow star. It was adopted by some people, particularly in the United States, and Leon Uris in Exodus has it too. And that, of course, is not true, because the yellow star was never introduced in Denmark at all. Then it was told and believed for many years to be a myth that the Danish king should have expressed his opinion that if the Germans would introduce the yellow star and enforce it in Denmark on the Jews, then he would be the first one to wear it himself, and he would encourage all Danes to wear it. This, for many years, was believed also to be a myth. My father used to call it poetic truth, meaning that it was a myth, but it had an element of really expressing the attitude of the Danes toward the Jews in those years. Only a few years ago was it finally established by somebody who got to look through the king's own notes of his conversations with cabinet ministers, that in one of these meetings in 1942, he had said exactly that if the Jews would be forced to wear the yellow star, he would be the first one to do it, and he would call upon all Danes to do the same. But then we have another story, which is absolutely real. In 1941, I would mention my father was a rabbi. He had been a rabbi in Germany until 1934, after Hitler came to power. And he then, for a number of reasons, left his rabbinate in the city of Beuthen, which today is Bytom in Poland. And because he was basically Danish, he returned to Copenhagen. But in Copenhagen, there was no position for him as a rabbi in the community. So he had to do with some odd jobs, like the teaching of Jewish subjects in the afternoons and Sunday mornings, of editing the Jewish monthly bulletin, and other odd jobs to keep going. Anyway, in 1941, together with the rabbi of the so-called Mahzikei Hadat, which is the Haredi community in Copenhagen, established in 1912, the two of them wrote a little book, a glimpse of Judaism. What it contains is that each of the rabbis wrote a piece about each of the weekly Parashat HaShavua, in Danish. And as they were very optimistic, they gave it the number 1. Number 2 didn't appear somehow. And that was printed in Copenhagen in 1941. On the 31st of December, 1941, my older sister, who was 14 years old at the time, was sent to the royal castle with a leather-bound copy of this book in order to find ways to hand it to the king. she met an elderly lady next to the palace, and the elderly lady was no other than the queen. And hearing what the errand was, she promised my sister that she would see to it that the king received the book. And indeed he did, as we know, because the next day, 1st of January 42, the postman came to our apartment, and he said to my mother, "You have a letter from the royal castle." And my mother said to him, you are not right with the date. It's not the 1st of April today. It was the 1st of January, and indeed it was not just a joke or anything. It was a real thing. And this is the letter which he brought, written on the same day he got the book, the 31st of December, and in the handwriting of the king. Also, the envelope was written with his handwriting. And what does the king tell a Jewish rabbi about a book on the weekly portions under German occupation? He writes, "Please accept my heartfelt thanks for the book you sent me, and please convey my heartfelt thanks also to your colleague." Now, the king also relates in the following, he relates to an incident that had taken place a couple of months earlier, when a couple of Danish Nazis had tried to put fire to the synagogue. Nothing much happened, no damage, and these two guys were sentenced by a Danish court, again, a Danish court under German occupation, sent these two people in prison for 3 years for the attempt to set fire to the synagogue. And the king writes, "I was sorry, with sympathy I heard about the fire in the synagogue, and I was happy that the damage was so small. Wishing you and your congregation a good new year. Happy New Year. Yours, Christian Rex." That is a Danish king writing to a Jewish rabbi about the book of Parashat Shavua. I think it's an incredible document. It had its honorable place on the wall in our apartment in Copenhagen. After our parents were no more, the family decided to donate the letter to the Museum of Danish Resistance in Copenhagen. And I had the opportunity to tell a group of visitors about it when I myself made a visit to the museum. And that, in contrast, that same year, on the king's birthday, Hitler wrote him a very elaborate letter of congratulations and good wishes and compliments and so on, to which he received a telegram saying, "Thank you, Christian Rex." It actually caused a crisis in the relations, because Hitler understood well enough how he was snubbed somehow by the king. But that, in contrast, and there's another interesting contract, which is of course coincidental, but I find it symbolic. The street where the Copenhagen synagogue is situated is called the Crystal Street. And putting that in contrast to what we know about the terrible Kristallnacht, when the synagogues, 250 or more synagogues in Germany were molested in November 38. So they have their Kristallnacht, and we have our Crystal Street and our Crystal Day. So that is as far as the king is concerned. Nevertheless, the situation in Denmark altogether went from bad to worse. A historian, an American historian who has written about the occupation of Denmark a few years ago, he gives here, I think, a very good summary of the situation when he said on the Danish part, there was a willingness to go far in anticipating and satisfying the occupying powers' demands. The Danes got to a stage where they actually sinned against democratic principles in order to save democracy. The worst example of that is, of course, in 1941, the Danes agreed to capture a number of Danish communists and put them into a prison camp, which of course is against all democratic principles. On the other hand, we have the German counterpart, who advanced the benign occupation policy that redirected Denmark's economy to Germany and intervened in Danish life with its iron fist lurking underneath the offered velvet glove. I think that is a very telling explanation of the situation in Denmark during the years of 1940, 41, 42, and even more so later on. In the meantime, many Danes were not satisfied with the rather passive way of expressing their national honor and identity. So eventually, small resistance groups were formed, and during 42 and 43, their activities became more and more outspoken. It came to a situation where there were, even in August 1943, there were strikes in several cities all over Denmark. Here we have demonstrants turning over a Danish police van. We have also barricades in the streets protesting against the German army in Denmark. And we have sabotage activities like derailing of trains. It would not be passenger trains. It was always trains that transported goods to Germany that were targets of these sabotage attacks. And the Germans eventually became more and more irritated. And in late August 1943, they presented the Danish government with an ultimatum demanding, putting up a number of demands. The central among them was introducing death penalty for sabotage against German property, and the Danish government declined to accept those terms, and accordingly the government was sent home by the German military in Copenhagen, and there was declared a military government in Denmark. So from now on, the German army was the sovereign in Denmark. Not formally, because when the government resigned, the king actually refused to accept the resignation. But for all practical purposes, they were not functioning. Here are all the conditions, how people have to behave, that they have to close the shops when it gets dark. They couldn't use post service, telegraphs, telephones, no strikes, etc., etc. Military rule in Denmark. Now, for the day-to-day running of affairs in Denmark, there remained a kind of technical government consisting of the general managers of the ministries in Denmark. They somehow ran the day-to-day business of Denmark. Now, on the same day, actually, the Germans also arrested about 250 Danish dignitaries, among them the chief rabbi of the community, Rav Friediger, and put them also in a prison camp outside Copenhagen. Then the German, I call him Chief Commissioner Plenipotentiary, was now a certain person who also liked Glückstadt. He was not like his name. His name was Dr. Best, and he was known as the butcher from Paris because he had been overlooking the deportation and the very harsh measures against the Jews and others in France before coming to Denmark in 1942. And he apparently decided that now, with the Danish opposition out of operation, time had come also to eliminate the Jewish question or the Jewish problem in Denmark. And he initiated a plan to arrest and deport all the Danish Jews, and he chose a date for it. The day was Friday night, between Friday and Shabbat, the 1st of October 1943. That particular Shabbat came immediately after 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. It's well known that the Germans often use Jewish festivals to take action against them. So also here it was the night of end of Rosh Hashanah, beginning of Shabbat, which was chosen for this operation. However, for many years it was believed that the hero of the story I'm going to tell now was a certain employee in the maritime department of the German representation in Copenhagen, a certain Mr. Duckwitz, who also after the war became an ambassador of Germany in Denmark. It seems, however, that the real hero, maybe in inverted commas, is Werner Best himself. It seems to most historians that Best played a double game in this whole story. He absolutely wanted to get rid of the Jews of Denmark. But on the other hand, he was aware that taking action against the Jews would cause a lot of uproar in the Danish society. He understood that situation, and he was very interested in keeping Denmark calm and quiet. One, because of the deliveries to Germany. Two, because he didn't want the army people to be the decisive force in Copenhagen, and they would have to increase the army and the authorities of the army if there would be unrest in Denmark. So he tried a balance act between the two targets he had. Of course, his superiors in Germany agreed with his plan of arresting all the Jews, sending them to camps, etc., etc. And he also took a step to invade the offices of the Jewish community and get all the lists of names and addresses of the Jews in Copenhagen. Everything was going towards the action on the 1st of October, including inviting 2 huge ships to Copenhagen, to the Copenhagen harbor, to transport the Jews to Germany. On the other hand, he apparently, through the Duckwitz, whom I mentioned before, he played the other side. One thing is that Duckwitz went to Sweden in sometime mid-September, trying to get the agreement of the Swedish government to accept the Danish Jews if they would be able to cross the Øresund, the strait. And the major activity was that on the Tuesday before the action was about to take place, Duckwitz told about the upcoming action to some of the leaders of the Danish Social Democratic Party, and they in turn brought it on to the Jewish community. So on Tuesday night, also somebody from the Socialist Party came to my father's home and told him that what was going to happen on the upcoming Friday night. Wednesday morning, my father was in shul, of course, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Zechor Brit, and relatively many people would attend the Slichot on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And at a certain stage in the Tefillah, I don't know which, my father stopped the Tefillah and he told all the present what was going to happen, and asked them, first of all, to spread the information to as many people as they could at all, and of course everybody to take care not to be at home on that Friday night. There were also other Jews who got the message and also spread it, and the result was amazing. When the Germans came to the Jewish apartments that Friday night, out of about, as I said, 7,500 Jews, they found 208. That was all. A few more in the provinces of where there were very few Jews from the outset, but that was what the Germans found at home and that night. It should be mentioned that the Gestapo people who were sent out to catch the Jews were told only to ring the bell, knock on the door, no violence, no noise, no breaking into apartments. Somehow it shows that even when people like that, when they are in a decent environment, they have somehow to play according to the rules. So there were actually Jews who were at home but did not open the door when the bell rang or there was knocking on the door, and they were left unharmed. There were also cases where non-Jewish neighbors would say, "What are you doing here?" "Ah, the Jews, they are not here anymore. They have left home long ago." And so on and so forth. So on that night, 200 Jews were caught. Where were all the others? Most of them were with non-Jewish colleagues, friends, and so on, who opened their arms and their homes to hide the Jews for that night. Also here, the Danish doctors did a major, gave a major assistance to hiding Jews by accepting them to hospitals under false names and with false diagnosis, so that they could stay in the hospital and not be at home when the Germans came. There were many hundreds of Jews who were saved in this way. Now, of course, that is all very nice as far as that night is concerned. What is going to happen further on? And here came the first joint venture of all the various resistance groups that had emerged in 1941-42. They, for the first time, made a joint operation during the coming 3 weeks, the 3 weeks of October. They managed, with the help of mainly fishermen's boats and other vessels, they managed to get 95% of the Danish Jews over the strait to Sweden. That was a major rescue operation. You have here some of the routes that were taken. You can see that most of the Jews managed to get over to Sweden from ports along the coast north of Copenhagen. A very important place was Gilleleje here. Some of you might have heard about Hornbæk. It's a place where many Jews used to have summer houses. It's not just here next to Gilleleje. And fewer in the south. It was really an operation. It was not an operation of individuals. It was an operation of, first of all, of the organization of the resistance movement, but it was actually an operation of the Danish people, because obviously such a thing as hiding 7,000 people and then bringing them over to Sweden is something that you cannot do without thousands of people knowing about it. Whether it's the ambulance drivers, the cleaning personnel in the hospital, those who are looking after the people near the port where they were boarding the ships, etc., etc. And there was almost no cases of telling off of this operation to the Germans. There was one single really bad event in Gilleleje, where one night there were rumors that the Germans were on their way, so the boats couldn't sail out, and the Jews had to be hidden. 80 of them were hidden on the church loft of Gilleleje, and apparently it was usually believed that it was a young girl who was friendly with a German soldier, heard about this, and she thought that her boyfriend would become a general if he could tell his superiors that there were Jews hiding in the church loft, and these 80 people were caught that night. But all in all, this was a most successful operation. It was in a variety of vessels, mostly, as I said, fishing boats, such as this. This is a very typical kind of picture from those days. I mean, basically there were no photographs and so on taken. This is a very rare one, which I believe is authentic, as is this one of 4 siblings who managed in a rowing boat to cross the strait, although even one of the oars broke during their tour to Sweden. So that is basically the story. I'll tell you our story, our personal story, which again, it starts here on that day of Erev Rosh Hashanah, Wednesday, after my parents and my older siblings had done what they could to spread the knowledge about the upcoming events. By the way, I mean, you couldn't just call people and say, you better not be home Friday night because the Germans will come in and fetch you. So one way that my parents used when they talked on the phone to people, they would say, you know, we are going on a few days vacation, And when I last saw you, you didn't look too well. So maybe you also take a few days off. And everybody understood that a rabbi does not go on vacation on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So that was one way of telling people that they should leave their homes. When my parents and siblings had done what they believed they could, we took the train with only very few belongings and traveled about 100 kilometers to a place there in that area where my father knew a priest. My father had been very active during those years since he came back from Germany in advocating a policy against the Nazis. And he held scores of lectures all over the country and wrote articles and even a book, a book against the lies that were told about the Jews. So this priest, instead of spreading us, we were 6 people, my parents, 4 children, he accepted all of us to his home, and we stayed with him for a week. My father first thought that it would be possible, maybe after the storm, to return to Copenhagen. It became clear that that was impossible. The 2 sons of the priest were active in the resistance movement. So on Erev Yom Kippur, we were taken down. The outlets here had become too dangerous. So we were brought down here to a town called Nykøbing Falster, where we were housed by the local bishop and giving a good meal, kind of Sudam of Seket. And in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening, we were directed to a fishing boat here in a little harbor here to travel to Sweden. We were 19 Jews on that boat. Women and children were in the storeroom downstairs and the men on the deck, as we saw on that boat before. And we set out at 7 o'clock in the evening. Now, of course, the distance we had to pass was much bigger than the distance here in this area. It was estimated that it would take about 6-7 hours to reach southern Sweden. But we were sailing and the hours went by, not 6, not 7, but both 8, 9, 10, 11, and no, not 11s yet. But at a certain stage, the skipper said to the men, "You see, there are lights ahead. We will soon be in Sweden." Hallelujah. Wonderful. Fortunately, our trip had taken many hours because we had reached the hour of dawning. And the men on the deck noticed that it was dawning behind the boat and not in front of the boat, meaning that we were westbound and not eastbound. We were on our way back to good old Denmark, to the open arms of the Germans. So they managed somehow to turn the boat around and we started in the right direction. Somehow, just after noontime on the day, we were opposite a Swedish fisherman's town or village on the shore, on the southern shore of Sweden. And then there was no more petrol on the boat. And we were there just floating around. Fortunately, some children of the fishermen were playing on the shore and on the beach, and they understood enough about sailing to understand that our boat was behaving in a strange way. So they called the parents, and the good fishermen of Lilla Bedinge in Sweden came out to take us ashore. In that way, we arrived safely at the end in Sweden, and we were most heartily received by the fishermen, taken to their homes, given food and rest and so on. What shall we say, pikuach nefesh on that day, really. And that was, of course, a heartwarming reception we received there. We don't know what was how it came that this fisherman behaved the way he did. The general explanation is that apparently he was used to fishing close to the shore, so he could always see land. Getting out in the night on the big Baltic Sea was a new experience for him. He didn't know how to navigate at all. That is apparently the most plausible explanation for his very odd behavior. The fisherman gave him some petrol so he could get home. I don't know where he ended on that trip. So in any way, we were safely in Sweden, and the Swedes in general received the Danish Jews very well. Most were first in some kind of refugee, I wouldn't say refugee camps. It would be seminars, in adult education centers with sleeping facilities, etc., where we would be installed. And then eventually people moved out, particularly there were the big cities of Sweden were closed to the Danish Jews, except if they got a job in these cities. But generally people somehow settled in the various cities of Sweden. There were some who stayed the whole period in some of these refugee camps. We ended up, after some troublesome wanderings around, we ended up in the city of Malmö in a small apartment, although the size, in spite of the size of the family, I even had a little sister born half a year after we arrived in Sweden. My father at a certain stage was appointed to be the rabbi of the Danish Jews in Sweden. So we almost never saw him at home. He would travel Sweden, which is a very large country, from between all the sites where there were Danish Jews, being a spiritual guide and arranging a special tefillot for the Danish Jews with the Danish liturgy, etc., etc. That was his occupation until the end of the war. By the way, having mentioned the priest where we stayed, a very exceptional feature of the Danish resistance to the action against the Jews was the resistance of the Danish church. Many Danish priests were organized in the resistance movement. British pilots who would throw down supplies to the Danish resistance movement in Denmark were told that if they had to jump out and leave their airplanes, they should seek refuge in the nearest church. That's where they could be certain of being well received and treated and helped along. And on the Sunday, after the operation against the Jews on Friday night, in all Danish churches, a letter from the Bishop of Copenhagen was read, protesting very vehemently against the action against the Jews. So that was a very, very special feature about it. All in all, the Jews managed quite well in Sweden. But of course, the happiness was enormous on the night of the 4th of May, 1945, when the war came to an end and Denmark became liberated. And towards the end of the month of May, almost all the Danish Jews returned to Copenhagen, to Denmark, to Copenhagen in particular. There were cases where returning Danish Jews were disappointed when their apartments had been occupied by, taken over by neighbors, and also some of their property had been stolen and so on and so forth. But in most cases, Danish Jews found their property intact in Denmark. In our case, for example, our landlord, he had stored most of our stuff into 2 rooms in the apartment, and then he let the apartment to somebody else, but with the clause that when we would come back to Copenhagen, the new tenant would have to vacate the apartment within 3 months. And that is what happened. So after having been wandering around for 3 months, we could eventually move into our former apartment and finding all our property intact. There were cases where people had already arranged the table for Rosh Hashanah with their expensive porcelain and so on. And coming back, they found the table standing exactly as they were left on that Erev Rosh Hashanah a year and a half earlier. Now, unfortunately, not all the Danish Jews escaped. I told you before that some 200 were arrested on that night, mainly elderly people who either could not or would not leave their homes. Some simply didn't believe that an action like the German one could take place in Denmark. So they were caught, and eventually, over the next weeks, the Germans caught more Jews. All in all, 471 Jews, Danish Jews, were sent to the concentration camp of Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. This is a painting my wife made. You see, you stand on the Danish coast, you see the lights of Sweden, and it's so close, but it's so far away, and how shall we get over there? They were brought to Theresienstadt. Now, again, something very exceptional happened. The Danish technical government did not stop pestering the Germans with asking for information what's happening to our Jews. And a month after the unsuccessful arrest of the Danish Jews, Eichmann came to Copenhagen. Somehow, apparently, Best managed to persuade him that it had been a huge success. Facts, no Jews in Denmark. So what do you want more? And apparently that he managed to appease Eichmann and to get from Eichmann 2 promises, which are very, very exceptional. One was that the Danish Jews in Theresienstadt would not be sent further on to they called it to the east, meaning to the extermination camps that the Germans ran in Poland, etc. And this promise was actually kept. I mean, the Danes in Theresienstadt didn't know that, but somehow at a certain stage they started finding it strange, because basically Theresienstadt was a transition camp. Jews were brought from all over Europe to Theresienstadt, and from there they were sent off to the extermination camps. The Danish Jews even having to assist them when they made these so-called transports. And somehow at a certain stage, of course, they started wondering, how is it that we are not sent on these transports? The second thing that Best achieved from Eichmann was that the Danish public was allowed to send food parcels to the Danish Jews in Theresienstadt. And after a couple of months, this was really well organized. And it can be said that these food parcels undoubtedly saved many, many lives. First of all, of Danish Jews, but the Danish Jews did also let others participate in the goods. And because starvation was the most common cause of death in Theresienstadt. So these food parcels were invaluable for the survival of the Danish Jews. And then came, towards the end of the war, the Swedish Duke Bernadotte got permission from the Germans to bring back to Denmark and Norway the Danish and Norwegian prisoners in the German concentration camps, mainly Danish police, resistance fighters, etc., etc. About 20,000 Danes and Norwegians that were in concentration camps. Now, Bernadotte actually did not think of the Jews in Theresienstadt, but the Danish doctor who was assisting in the operation, he somehow got enough buses organized to travel to Theresienstadt. And on the 13th of April, about 3 weeks before the end of the war, the Danish Jews were taken out of Theresienstadt and driven back through Germany, through Denmark, and brought over to Sweden. When traveling through Denmark, they were received with immense joy and welcoming. When they passed through the Danish cities, people came out cheering and throwing sweets and food stuff into the buses. Here we can't see it, but waving flags, etc., etc. A fantastic welcome back to Denmark. And so the war ended. And in the summer of 1945, we had a very special visit. I suppose you know who that is. General Montgomery himself came to visit Copenhagen in the summer of 45 and most enthusiastically received by the Danish public. And we have here from the 5th of May, two freedom fighters, Danish freedom fighters, watching a kind of a storeroom or something where it says closed because of happiness, and then hooray. How do we know they are Danish resistance freedom fighters? We know it from their arm binds where we have the colors of the Royal Air Force, which became the colors of the Danish resistance movement out of admiration for the Royal Air Force. This is a story. Now, of course, it cannot finish without also asking how come that this could happen in Denmark, a story which did not happen elsewhere. The answer which I personally find most satisfying belongs to the first historian who investigated scientifically the events in Denmark during the German occupation. Her name was Lene Yachil, who in the 60s wrote her doctoral thesis, and she named the doctoral thesis The Rescue of the Danish Jews, quite an obvious title for her dissertation, but she added a subheading, and the subheading says, a democracy that stood its test. Now, of course, you have to bear in mind that both geographically and chronologically, the autumn of 1943, the closeness of Sweden behind the strait were, of course, factors which were essential to the success of the rescue operation. We were autumn 1943, the fortune of war seemed already to have turned more against the Germans after their defeats in Stalingrad and in El Alamein. And that also was possibly a reason for the Swedish government to be more cooperative than it had been maybe before. So those, of course, were external factors which enabled the operation's success. But the matter of the democracy that stood its test, I find very convincing. She also brought examples from other historical situations where the Danes behaved differently from what other nations might have done in the same situations. But here, the matter was that democracy in Danish eyes was not just a matter of the rule of majority, holding elections every 4 years and so on. Democracy basically was a matter of solidarity between citizens. A citizen could not sit back and watch his fellow citizen being persecuted, being discriminated against because of his religious faith. And therefore he had to take action. And it has, of course, to be said that we were saved not because we were Jews, but because we were considered Danish. And the Danish citizen could not see another Danish citizen being sent off to a very fateful destination. So that's the story. And I would like also to point out again, the special thing is there were Chasidei Umot HaOlam in many countries, people who risked their lives to save Jews, but they were individuals who took that action. Here we have a people. And in Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim, there are very few trees planted with individual names of Danes who helped saving Jews. But there are 3 very significant trees at Yad Vashem. One is for the Danish king, King Christian X, who I spoke about. The second is for the Danish resistance movement. And the third one is for the Danish people. And that is a particular stamp of the little light that was lit in Denmark in the huge darkness of Europe in those days. And really, thank you for being so patient. And if there should be any questions and so on, I should gladly be at your disposal.
Thank you so much. It was a real beautiful, phenomenal marathon. And before we finish, we have a few questions. So please put your hand up or place your waving the hand on the screen. But then I can see Lila wanting to ask a question. Please, yeah. Lila.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you. And secondly, I'd like to show you this.
I'm going to spotlight your screen. Wait a moment. Here it is.
One of my uncles married a Danish lady who converted to Judaism, and she thought of King Christian as second only to the Archangel Gabriel. And this was for his 50th birthday, and she gave it to my mother. And it's a wonderful, wonderful story that you have told, and thank you so very much.
Show it to him. Well, if you show it to him, because we can see the...
Yeah, that's 1920, so
that was his 50th birthday. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. Would anyone else like to ask any questions? Hold on, I'm just doing speaker view. Remove spotlight. Gallery view, so I can just see anyone waving their hands. Just wait a moment, go through the screens. No, okay. So just to remind everyone again, Firstly, thank you so much, Pinchas, for your really enlightening talk, and really was wonderful. To remind everyone, on Wednesday night, we're doing our special Tu B'Shvat Seder over Zoom. Tonight is the last night to book the small boxes of the 30 cut fruits. On Thursday, we have for the kids special arts and crafts activities over Zoom. On Sunday, we have the very uplifting and moving service of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, led by Roy Thurley and the North Wales Christian Friends of Israel. And we're delighted that Roy and Jackie are with us this evening as well. You would have seen on the synagogue emailer which we sent out at lunchtime, there's a YouTube link for the event, and there's a poster for it. So obviously it'll be sent out again later on in the week, but please put it in your diaries for 7 o'clock this coming Sunday. Again, thank you so much, Pinchas, and I'm going to unmute everyone. I can just see one more, Daniel Tishby. I'm just asking you to unmute a question to ask. Yes, Daniel.
Thank you very much for this amazing talk. Just one quick question. The first Melchior who came to Denmark, where did he come from? Which town?
He came from Hamburg.
Ah, beautiful. I'm from Hamburg.
Yeah, but that was 1760.
Okay, fine. I didn't live there back then.
You weren't around those days, were you?
Not quite, even not my parents, but still.
The thing is, we don't know where he originated, or his ancestors, that we don't know.
Ah, he might have come even from Eastern Europe originally.
Eastern, Southern, many possibilities.
What does the name Melchior come from? Melech or?
We read it in Hebrew, Malchior. And I was convinced when I saw the English translation of Sefer Breshit, and I saw that Melchizedek was spelled M-E-L-C-H-I, Melchi, then it was absolutely convincing that the origin of our name is Malchior, like he is Melchizedek. So that's the way we name ourselves in Israel. And it was actually used in the 18th century often as a private name, but and it came then from Menke, became Melchior, but this Melchior took it as his surname, if not before, then when he settled in Denmark.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to unmute everyone, and at the same time ask all to unmute.